Okay, the second half of the day, we're going to switch it up a little bit. We did some of the administrative and some of the fiscal components earlier on. This afternoon, a greater focus on some of the programmatic components. Afterwards, a colleague of mine is also going to share some information on some effective practices. For those of you that were in Cohort 1, this will be a new presentation for you. I told you we're going to keep it a little bit sharp and different. So I'm hopeful that you will enjoy the presentation that comes after me. We'll touch on data collection and evaluation responsibilities. We will have a formal afternoon break as well, and then we'll do some site visit preparation with that 4 o'clock goal as our timeline, and we shall see how closely we can adhere to that. You were all rewarded with chocolates and candy, so please no yawning, because if you were up here and saw folks yawning, you would not be happy. So please stand up, stretch, do what you need to do. We're all grown folks. We really appreciate that. So we're going to dive right into it. So when we talk about leadership here, and I know that this is a term that's really thrown about quite a bit, and it means different things to different people. So leadership in this context, especially for the staff that the BSCC has the contract with, this really means that you have to own your program. And so what do I mean by that? It's not sufficient to say we have the grant, and I'm just going to hand it off to John Doe or Jane Doe and then just check back in. If you do that, your program will not do well. I'll just kind of cut to the chase. I won't sugarcoat it for you. The programs that I've had the chance to visit that flourish, the project staff are integrated in all components of the project. That does not mean, and I'm certainly not looking to convey, that you need to micromanage or that you need to be present for every single meeting. I want to be clear about that. But what it does mean is when folks have questions, when the project is maybe going off kilter just a little bit, that there's some clear structure in place. And again, we're in this for the long haul, right? So this is, still August, and we have to go to 2023. Yeah, that's quite a ways away. Now, experience has taught us that a good amount of you in this room will not finish the grant program because you will have promotions, you will have transfers, you will have all these wonderful life opportunities that come your way, but this contractual agreement will still be in place. Sounds like a marriage, right? It's still in place. Why do I bring this up? It's really important that even if you have folks that are not here, that you get into the habit of training, informing, and making sure others are really clear about what the grant does and does not do. Some of my favorite phone calls are from folks who joined the grant, and it's about a halfway in, and they've got this great vision and perspective, and they're going to do something no one's ever thought about before. The only problem is the grant doesn't pay for those activities. And so again, we don't want to stifle ingenuity, but again, please make sure that you clearly communicate to everyone kind of what the grant does and does not do. And although this is the programmatic component, I would add that this includes, fiscally, your administrative grant agreements, things of that nature, that it's just really important that the tone is set and maintained. So along those lines, one of the things that we really want to emphasize is communication. So again, Ricardo's thrown out buzzwords. Why is he doing this? Again, the programs that flourish, they have really good communication. And so what does communication mean? And for those of you that have had site visits with us, we really believe in documenting things, not because we want to make you do more work, but like I said again, history has taught us that many of you will transition to other positions, and new staff are going to come in, and if you have really poor handwriting, good luck to that staff. If you have really poor notes, good luck to that staff. If there are unexpected changes, good luck to that staff. And it's also not fair, fair to the clients as well, if there's that lapse. So when we talk about communication, as you think about your partners, be them governmental or non-governmental, does everyone know what your project goals are? Do you know what your project goals are? Right? If you did not write your proposal, if you've inherited this beautiful project and you've had some phone calls from my staff asking you kind of a lot of questions, you're not sure what they're talking about, you might want to start reading your proposal now. And that's okay. If that's where you are, judgment-free zone. But again, we want to make sure that you're really clear on what your goals are. I think the number one, or maybe I guess the number two stopper after kind of procurement that we run into is your referral processes. Spend time today, if you can, and if not, more realistically on Monday morning, outlining your referral process. Especially if this is your first time receiving grant funds from us, the expectation is that you're able to hit the ground running. And as we mentioned earlier, there's an implementation period that's built in. But what I would really hate to see is that January 1 hits and you're now having that conversation of, so how do clients get into the door? That would not be good grant management on my part or on your part. And so again, it doesn't mean that you have to have services in place. You may not have them in place for all the procurement reasons that we've discussed, but there's nothing that prohibits you now from having really extensive conversations. And many of you, I know you adopted, there's a no wrong door approach. So what does that mean in practice? It's one thing to say it out loud, but if I'm a client, how do I actually get into your program? And is it clear to everyone how I get into your program? So again, good communication. Along those lines, I know several of you are here because we requested that you be here in some type of an official capacity, but it may be that, due to your position, it's not realistic for you to have a day-to-day role on the grant. Perfectly acceptable and fine. But the question is, when providers have questions, is it clear who they should be contacting? When challenges arise, similarly, who should they contact? When should they contact them? Is that all defined? Along those same lines, what are the key activities and key dates that you want to be mindful of? We spent some time talking through when our reports are due, so when you must submit, be it financial or programmatic reports to the BSCC, but that's our timeline. Do you need to build in timeline on your end? So do you need, for example, 30 days in advance before you submit something to us to review your submissions from your providers, from your community partners? Do you need 10 days? Whatever the case might be. Again, common things that we kind of run into are, well, I just got the information from the provider just 2 days ago. I haven't had a chance to scrub it. And again, these are things that we can plan ahead for. We've tried to give you the dates in advance. That's not to say that we won't work with you. If it's at all within our control and it's reasonable, we'll absolutely make those accommodations. But certainly we want you to plan those things out well in advance, and it will pay dividends much later on down the line. So let's talk about quality control. And I like that cute graphic there because although it's cute, I think it really illustrates the larger point that we want to make. We've spent as a state a significant amount of time and now financial investment into the proposals that we've decided to fund. And so one of the things that we want to avoid is that a year and a half from now, 2 years from now, what we funded and what you are doing look very different. And again, this is your responsibility. Our responsibility is we will try to come out when we can and have phone calls with you and try our best to be supportive of you, but only you really know if your program is working the way that you've intended. And so what we want you to do, again, in terms of some takeaways is really just to think through, again, from day one, do you have a quality control process in place? If your program is deviating from what it's intended to do, how would you know? Does it have to be that a client's had a really bad episode and then you find out that you're providing a service that maybe isn't a part of the grant? Does it have to be something catastrophic? Do you have telephone check-ins, on-site check-ins, whatever the case might be? But again, is there really a process in place? And then more importantly, if it's not documented, it did not happen. All right. So again, for auditing purposes, and then I think more so just in terms of just good business practice, what we want to be able to say with a straight face is if I visit one of your providers and they say, well, they're just doing that because they don't like me, or they're just doing that because one time I had a conversation and I said something that made them uncomfortable. And I personally try not to subscribe to that. And I instead say, well, is there a policy and procedure? Is there something documented that we can look at? Maybe we can start with that as a starting place to help you kind of get through some of the challenges that you're having. And again, you're going to know your providers, you're going to know your workflow models much better than we are. We will come out maybe once a year, So again, to the extent that you can, please invest in quality control early and often. So one thing I do want to flag in this section is regarding the local advisory committee. And in the actual RFP itself on page 15, I won't flip through it now, but the RFP is provided in the very last tab under resources. But page 15 basically kind of lists out at a really high level what's required for your local advisory committee. There's many different models for the local advisory committee. Some folks have adopted existing committees. Some folks have combined committees. Some folks have started from scratch. Whatever your mean is, that's certainly up to you. I would say that the RFP does outline and provide some really strong suggestions about the types of membership that you should find on your LAC. And it's, again, all the things that you would think of in alignment with Prop 47. So folks who've been system impacted, mental health professionals, different public safety professionals, and there's a pretty exhaustive list that we ask you to consider. In terms of things that you must do, however, you must host regular meetings, and those meetings have to be open to the public. So what does regular meetings mean? Whatever you discern, you discern that to be. We intentionally don't define it. If for you 3 meetings in a year is regular and will allow the public a chance to engage, perfectly fine. If it's quarterly, if it's monthly, whatever the case might be, we certainly want to give you that flexibility. What we will ask, though, is that the public must be able to access those meetings. So again, thinking back to those videos that we showed you earlier and bring it all around, one of the overarching kind of concepts and concerns that people have was that when the grant funds were done, or were administered, that this would be occurring in secrecy. And so there was this fear that if I'm a community member, what will be my opportunity if there's a grant in my neighborhood or my area to kind of hear that conversation? Can I even be a part of that process? So again, we always want you to be mindful of what are the opportunities to share this information with the public. And I've shared with a few of you, even on site visits, you could do all of these things and you may not have the public attend. I want to absolutely acknowledge that, but it's also my responsibility to always ask you some really basic questions. Where are you posting it? How are you posting it? Who's the recipient of your postings? Is your meeting location or your meeting time a barrier for public access? So again, there's things that we want to be mindful of. And again, we need you to document everything. So minutes, attendance, any outreach efforts, things of that nature. So I'll pause just for a quick second. Any questions on the local advisory committee? Great. I would encourage you, if you have not already, to really review your local advisory committee roster that was submitted with your proposal and really ensure that it reflects, again, on page 15 of the RFP, some of the membership that we have provided for you as well. Okay, so let's talk about progress reports. I think Stacy and I are going to tag team this section. So bear with me for a second here. So for those of you that are in Cohort 1, we're going to keep some elements of the progress reports, and then some other elements will change. And then for those of you that are new, all this is new, so that's even better. I think we have already flagged this at least initial document with all of you already, so I'll just go over it at a really high level, and then I'll let Stacy talk about our second attachment. So right off the bat, at least for now, we're going to have 2 different documents that you'll be completing at least through the end of this calendar year to submit your progress reports. I will note that we are working on a truly all electronic format that will look very different. I wish I could share more about it, but we are in the middle of procurement. And much like you, I thought we would be done a long, long, long time ago, but here we are. But I do want to flag that for a portion of the grant, you will have some kind of static reporting measures, and then eventually we're going to transition to a more cloud-based reporting system, webinars and all that kind of support to come. And that's just on the program side. The fiscal side will continue to be what it is, but I do want to acknowledge that. So in the interim, this is what your Word progress report will look like. It will include the dates, At the very top, your grantee name, your title, all this stuff will kind of be static. Your goals and objectives will be listed here, and the expectation is that each reporting period, you provide some text that corresponds to your listed goals and objectives. So if you have whatever your goal is, and then A, B, and C will be where your objectives are listed. And every submission, you will provide us progress updates on the things that you have prescribed or described to us. So again, I'll reiterate this. This is your language. This question comes up a few times. I'm not making up your goals. We're not editing your goals unless there's some really bad spelling. But beyond that, we're really not messing with it. And the expectation is that you will just provide updates on the goals and objectives that you've listed. I believe most of you have a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 3. And then there's some basic narrative questions that you will respond to on every quarter. We intentionally have some fiscal questions built into the program report. One of the biggest challenges that we find is that the program and the fiscal staff don't correspond. And so when we go out to do visits and the fiscal staff said, I had no idea they were doing that. No one told me. And we end up with this. And so we hope that the progress report, it may or may not, but we hope that it encourages you to communicate as a team. The first couple of questions really speak to, are the grant funds being expended as planned? And then there's some leverage questions, and they all kind of go hand in hand there. There's some prompts that really ask you if all the grant-funded positions are filled. And then we get into some real specifics about the location of services. Again, we want to keep the local advisory committee on your front and center, so that's built in there as well. Again, we ask some more fiscal questions about the leveraging of grant funds. And quality assurance is a really important concept for us, so there are prompts for that. If applicable, we do ask about grant-related trainings. Again, those are things that are certainly very important to us. And so if you have allocated funding for them, be it in your grant funds or your leverage funds, we would certainly love to hear about those things. We always ask for at least one grant-funded accomplishment. Now, I'll mention it. It does say at the bottom, all of these reports are subject to Public Records Act requests. So there's that. But then secondly, I really hope that you put time into this. I won't name names, but there's some really excellent folks in this room who every quarter can provide at least one success story. It's not going to me per se, but we do get quite a bit of PRA requests. And we may get the occasional request from the legislature, and they want to know where's the money going. So when you submit this, although I am the recipient of it, I am not the final audience of it. So please think broadly when you provide this. If there's any identifying information, as per always, feel free to redact names. Then the last few questions speak to recidivism, and we're going to talk about this in greater detail. So I'm going to skip it for now, and then let Stacy talk about our temporary Excel reporting.
Oh, I got mine. Okay, so this is, for those of you that are from Cohort 1, this is going to be a major change between 1 and 2, and that this go-around we're asking for some de-identified participant measures. So the Excel file for Cohort 1, where you had the aggregate information, you'll no longer be aggregating that information. As Ricardo said, we're going to be getting a cloud-based system. Hopefully, Ricardo told me to say sometime in 2020. I'm going to be a little more optimistic and say early 2020. But yes, it has taken substantially longer than we had anticipated, and I have become very good friends with the sales rep for this product. So once it gets online, it will be very user-friendly. There will be a lot of flexibility in terms of entering the data as to whether you want to keep it like a spreadsheet type format, or if you want to use like checkboxes and drop-down menus, that will be an option as well. So it's very user-friendly. What we have in the interim is very clunky. And so I'm going to apologize for that now, but know that this is temporary. I'm not going to talk a lot about the actual measures yet. We'll talk about those in a little bit, but I just wanted to show you sort of the setup for this. So each row will be one individual, and there are different validations within each of the cells. So, for example, with gender or with age, if you tried to put in letters, it's not going to let you. It needs to be numbers. And so if there's drop-down menus available for like gender, so you have all of the categories here, you can use that. Once you've entered in the next, after that, you just hit F for female and it'll auto-populate, but you do need to fill that in initially. And that goes through when we get to further over where we're asking for some dates. There is a set format that you must adhere to, otherwise it won't accept it, which is just the 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 4-digit year for that. Now, all of this, and we'll be talking about, again, the specifics of the specific variables later on today, but all of the definitions and the formatting is all in these other files, or these other sheets here. So you can go back and look and say, oh, well, age, it wasn't letting me, why not? Well, you can see here with the format, it needs to be whole numbers. And so we have a different sheet for each of the different types of, or sections of data. The only two sheets that you will need to worry about are these two that are yellow. The Prop 47 DPM data sheet here, that's what I've showed you. And this one here is where you will put in local definitions. So if for recidivism, in addition to the state definition, you're also using a local definition, you'll want to put that here. How you're defining program completion is going to vary for every agency, so you'll want to put that here. And again, we'll talk about the specifics of those later on today. Really just want to give you an opportunity to sort of see what this is going to look like. It will, these are the basic columns. It's going to vary slightly. So we do have, for example, columns for dates for diversion. If you don't have a diversion program, those columns will be there in the file. They'll be hidden, so you won't see them. But those you won't necessarily see those. If you have a diversion program, you will see those. Any questions on the Excel file? Oh, sorry, Daniel, yes. Yes, it will be submitted every quarter. Yeah. Yes, good question, thank you. So again, I'm really hoping the system will be up sooner than later. And I'm really hoping we won't need to use this more than one quarter, if a quarter at all. But if we do go beyond more than one quarter, you submit it, and then it will have will be updated for the next quarter. You won't have to fill in the demographic information for the participants that you filled in the quarter before. It'll just be the updated information. Now, with the new system, what will happen is we will send you an email saying, here's the participants that you said were enrolled last time. Let us know what services they're receiving. So just check the boxes that they received. Did they complete the program? If so, put in the completion date. So once we get the new system, it'll be much easier for ongoing updates. But yes, if we have to go more than one quarter, we will update this, and you'll have a new one for the second quarter with the existing information in it already. So there's a couple of ways you'll be able to do this. You can take your data, if you're able to extract it into like an Excel file, and format it with, you're able to set the formats in a specific order for the each of the columns, then you will be able to upload that, and you won't have to enter it manually. So I know, and I know you had comments on the when we sent out the survey. I should say also, because this is something new to the BSCC of collecting the identified participant level data. Before we started, we talked with the existing grantees, we talked with evaluators, we sent out some surveys and got feedback on all of this, and it really did affect our decision process in this, and what variables we used, the categories, and we know it's going to be different for every single grantee, and so this is going to be sort of a learning curve for us as much as it is for all of you, and we're definitely going to work with all of you on how this will work with your program and with your system that you have. We don't want to make you have to do a ridiculously large amount of work for this. Which is why this cloud-based system is great, because you have clients that are continuing. You'll see that, and what services did they receive this quarter, and it'll just be checking off the ones that they received. Right. Now, the way that this system will work is this is going to be up to you as to how you want to manage it at the local level. If you want your service providers to have access and to enter that data, so if you have like peer navigators that entered the demographic information or something like that, you can definitely do that. We ask, though, that if you're going to do that, that you do have somebody from the lead agency who is doing random periodic quality control checks on that. So, and I know Ricardo mentioned this earlier about a lot of the stuff being abstract. And so it's sort of hard to conceptualize, hard to kind of fully visualize it. But we're definitely going to work with each of you. We don't want this to be something that you're having heart palpitations over. So, yeah. Great question about if you have a participant that leaves and comes back, and we're going to talk about this later today, but what I will tell you is that we have that set up so that you should use that same number. Yes. Yes, so whatever you define, however you define program completion, will determine when you stop reporting on that person. Yeah. Let's talk later. That's correct. This is just specific for Cohort 2. If you're Cohort 1 and Cohort 2, this is not the case. So if you have other questions, because we have a lot to cover, there's note cards on your tables. Write them down so you don't forget, and either catch up with me at some point today or touch base with me later on. I don't want to cut anyone off, but we have a lot to cover. And I know this is going to prompt a lot of questions, and hopefully some of them I'll answer when we talk about the specific variables themselves. But this is, know that this is, like I said, a learning process for us too. And so we're really willing to work with you guys and try to make this as painless as possible for everyone involved. So please come and see me later if you have questions. So we'll make sure that we get answers for you.
All right, thank you. And like Stacy said, this is the first of many conversations. I think our goal here is just to introduce it to you with the understanding that there is more to come. We are trying something new and different. We believe that it will make life easier eventually for you. And so we want to get to that place, and we will. Okay, so other things we want to touch on recidivism. As we mentioned earlier on, the one kind of required unit of measurement for the grant, or the required term, I should say, is recidivism. And the definition is up on the screen for you. The thing that we really want to kind of impart is the state definition uses conviction as the primary unit of measurement. Now, if in your program, you use a different definition of recidivism, which is certainly very common. This has a very kind of limited subset. Many of you may have access to different data points. That's all perfectly fine. What we ask that you do is that you report on both the state definition and any other local definition that you have. In other words, it's perfectly fine if you have something else in addition to this definition. But at a minimum, we do need you to report on the state definition as well. In large part, part of what we have to do, again, with the grant is to track reductions in recidivism. We would like to be able to say, based on the state definition, it means blank, whatever that means. And if your local definition includes other variables, other measurement points, we want to acknowledge that as well. Our goal is not to inflate or deflate the state definition. We're just required to use it as our unit of measurement, but we absolutely want to acknowledge that there are other definitions in play. And the other thing we want to start on, and I'm going to segue to Stacy on this, is to begin those recidivism discussions as soon as realistic. And by those discussions, what we're referring to is tracking, collecting, and who to talk to about that. And I will transition to you.
Yeah, so with the recidivism data, ideally, you want to be thinking about who can we get this data from? So do you have, if you're not a local law enforcement agency, do you have a relationship with a local law enforcement agency where you can get this data? You can get the data through Cal DOJ if that's the route you want to go. Note that it is a time-consuming process. It takes several months to get the data, and there is a long form that you have to fill out, sign your life away, do background checks, and give up your firstborn, so just so you know. But you can do that. Now, the one thing I want to mention too is with the quarterly progress reports, it will ask for recidivism data every quarter. If you don't have that data every single quarter, that's okay. Okay. We do want a couple times a year, we would like you to send that to us, but we know that it's not easy for any agency to get that data together and have that available to report every single quarter. And so if you can get it to us a couple times a year, we're fine with that. But be thinking about how are we going, how are we going to define data, recidivism if we're using a local definition? Where are we going to get the data from? Who do we have contacts with? And sometimes, you may have to be willing to sort of put some candy on the table also, to do a favor, pat somebody on the back so you can get it, because it does take a lot of time to get that together.
All right, thank you, Stacy.
Any questions on that before we move on? Yes, Vanessa. I am hoping in my free time in the next few months to set up a time to talk with Cal DOJ and see if there's something that we can do, because we have now 36 in different agencies that are going to be contacting them for data, and that's a lot of work for them. And so I have no idea what they may say. They may just laugh at me, and that may be the end of it, or work with us. I don't know, but that is, I'm going to be talking with them in the next few months and trying to see if we can work something out with them.
A penal code section that should give public defenders access directly to DOJ records in a way that historically only prosecutors and police have had. And that's especially for public defender units whose job is to work on post-conviction relief issues, of which Prop 47 is one. So for anyone working with public defenders on their project, that might be a good way to get access. The other thing is I sort of never miss an opportunity to make this plug on recidivism, which is that, especially for lower level Prop 47 type offenses, recidivism is most often a reflection of enforcement and much less often a reflection of actual outcomes. And that can look very different across communities. It can look very different across police resources. And it doesn't tell you anything about whether this individual substance dependent or mentally ill person has gotten better. It just tells you whether they've had contact with police. So there's a way to forward that up the chain.
Yes, no, very, very good point. Very true. We have those definitions. We're going to go over.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so a few more things in this section before we just transition to another topic before the break. So program modifications. I always flag this to let folks know. In theory, you will be able to implement your projects pretty closely to what you're funded to do. Since I've been with the board, which has been about almost 7 years, I don't think we've actually authorized a significant program modification. But again, just to let you know, if something went catastrophically wrong with your project and you needed to make a really significant change, that there is a process for that. At least we want to acknowledge that. Again, it's pretty rare to almost non-occurring, but should that be the case, certainly just reach out to the lead on that project, and just know in advance, as with everything, we would have to have some pretty detailed conversations with you before a formal documentation is submitted, and ideally also from the project director. So I mentioned this before, other than in the summer, where we typically take time off to do as many visits as we can, we try to have quarterly calls throughout the year. We think they're informative, and based on the comments I've heard from a few others that have been through them, it sounds like it's mutual as well. It's really an opportunity for folks to do a lot of different things. So talk about challenges, talk about updates. I've heard of a lot of different problem solving. Again, referrals is one of the sticky points, and it can be helpful to talk with peers who are kind of going through some of those challenges as well. And in a few instances, we've even been able to offer some kind of technical assistance by phone. But I will say that the call isn't so much so for us as it is an opportunity for you to really engage with each other. It's amazing how you find comfort in misery. So if you feel like you've been stalled and your procurement process is taking forever, and it turns out that 6 other folks are in that place with you, you tend to feel a little bit better. If it turns out that you've been trying to collect this one data point and you've just had so many challenges and others can share how they've been able to rectify it, I mean, that's great. Now, there are times where you may get feedback that's also not helpful because that's the nature of the public engagement process. But for the most part, I do think it's been very helpful. So we will schedule those at some point in the very near future. And so just some takeaways to wrap up this section. So again, as soon as possible, begin documenting your quality control plan. And if you don't have one, begin those conversations sooner rather than later. Really be thoughtful about your local advisory committee in terms of your outreach, your engagement, and how you're going to document it. And obviously, like we said again, certainly begin having those conversations regarding recidivism, how you're going to collect it, and what resources you may need to make it work.